Okay, we need to talk about the Assassin's Creed RPGs. And this time, I'm gonna record my audio. You know that time in every young person's life where a 33-year-old strange woman sits them down and is like, hey, now we really need to deep dive into Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed RPG era. This is that time. The time is now. I recently finished Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and I consider myself to be a late Assassin's Creed fan, as in the first Assassin's Creed game that I hit the credits on was Assassin's Creed Odyssey. So I mean late. But that's because I'm way more of an RPG fan than I am an Assassin's Creed fan. I did play the first one way back when with my brother on 360, but the main thing I remember is that I wanted to play real fast and I just kept getting seen by gods and then absolutely destroyed. It was not really my bag of chips. What I did always love was strategy RPGs, dense, number-based RPGs. You know, if you've seen my earlier episodes, or if you haven't, you can find them. They're on the WhatCulture thing. But what's fantastic about the AC RPG era is if you, like me, have been waiting around for the Elder Scrolls 6 to come along for so long now that you're seriously wondering if you could just talk yourself into getting into an MMO just so you'd have a huge expansive RPG to play. Yeah, that's where I'm at. I desperately needed a fantasy RPG, and boy do I love ancient Greece. So that's really what got me sold on Assassin's Creed Odyssey. And even before I played it, I don't think I had quite a big enough understanding of just how properly dense an RPG it was going to be. It and Valhalla, which are the two games I play end to end, and more than a couple of 100 hours in each, I absolutely adored. They are such quintessential role-playing games, not just in having deep RPG mechanics that reward you honing your play style, min-maxing, which I adore, leaning into. Each of them have a fairly discrete assassination branch, marksman branch, archery, depending, and just a melee getting into it hand-to-hand branch. You're absolutely rewarded for leaning into one if you really want to go ham and actually worry about the tiny percentiles of maximizing how much damage you're doing. And a game like Odyssey will literally give you a score all the way down the bottom of the screen that tells you how much assassin damage you're doing. And late game, we're talking like 1 million. You can be really specific about the gear you get, and it's almost, not to jump into a completely different genre Ubisoft game, but it's almost like The Division, where all the little gear attributes of things will buff certain things, and you want to be quite particular about making sure you're buffing the abilities you actually want to use, because that's going to drastically change your effectiveness. And unless you're playing them all the way down on the story, easy difficulty settings, these games are actually pretty darn challenging, especially in Odyssey when you're going up against the mythical beasts, and the big hulking heroes in Valhalla will genuinely give you a run for your money. There's something that Valhalla does that I think is exceptional outside of the RPG mechanical experience, and something I need to talk more about, which is its characterization. And that's the way that it does side content. There are, like I said with Inquisition, there's very valid arguments to be made that these worlds are too big and there are too many things to do. But I still can't help but sometimes feel like it's like saying, this buffet is too big. Okay, yes, some things at the buffet you don't necessarily want, but you can just like not eat the green beans. Like, you can go to the buffet where you had to pay the same price as everybody else and then only eat the expensive seafood. If that's what you want to do, if you want to just like mainline the real meat of it, no pun intended, you absolutely can. Personally, I love a buffet because I go and get tiny little bits of everything. And then I have a plate that has Chinese food and tapas and Indian food and garlic bread and pizza. And it's like everything is just fine, but I have everything. I feel like I'm really heading into food territory and away from my point. What Assassin's Creed Valhalla does that I think is really fantastic, that steps outside of what you'd expect from normal RPGs, is the way that it deals with side content. Instead of having side quests, it does a thing called mysteries, which are little blue dots on your map. Gold dots are treasure, white dots are a few different things, but primarily they seem to be tattoo designs. That's the one where you're running all over the ramparts, chasing a thing to pick up, otherwise known as the thing that makes me so angry that I break mouses and keyboards and controllers. So I decided I probably need to stop doing those ones. But mysteries are these fascinating little side stories that come in all ways, shape, and forms. Sometimes they're just funny little tidbits. Sometimes they're very heartfelt. Maybe you're trying to reunite star-crossed lovers, or a family is like, oh my God, this guy, her husband smells so friggin' bad, it's absolutely disgusting, and you need to hoist him over your head and chuck him in a pond. There's all these like weird little things you can do. One of the ones I remember in Valhalla that I rocked up to is there were these kids who were running like a little shop up in their treehouse, like kids, you know, who have a lemonade stand or something. And I would go up there and they were like selling a magical rock that was just a random rock, and they were selling an old boot, but they're like, don't worry, the boot holds its form with like, you know, a filling on the inside. And they were like, this is $3, this is $5. And I was like, Eivor is such a great character. She's like, you kids, I'll buy everything. And it turns out the boot had like a treasure map inside it. That was like the paper that they were referring to. But I think what's fantastic about them is, one, you actually have to pay attention because you're not given objective markers. So it's just, you need to walk into that situation, listen to what the characters are saying, and then, you know, head off to where they might be referring to, or try and address what you think is happening. With the kids one, if I hadn't have decided to buy things, it wouldn't have quote unquote resolved the mystery. It would have just stayed there. And you will run into situations where perhaps you run along one and then you don't quite understand what to do, or, you know, different things happen, or you just decide this is confusing and then you move along. But each of the mysteries is actually a fun little story, or it's just like these tiny little events that happen. And by and large, they don't usually take you more than a couple of minutes, maybe 5 for most of them. It was a fantastic one I came across the other day. So it's totally worth the fact that I recorded this for 40 minutes and then I had to start again because my mic wasn't working. Where it was like a drinking contest. So the fascinating thing about Valhalla, of course, is you have all these are we the baddies moments, because you sort of are invading England, then pledging to all the different shires, colluding with the allies that you do have in the area to put your people in power. And everything you do is for your people, for your brother Sigurd, helping Randvi sort of nail down the political side of what's going on and further establish your little township and expand it within Ravensthorpe, where it's in England. And there's this particular place you can go where obviously a lot of the English people, not a big fan of the Norse, because, you know, the Vikings with all the invading and stuff. So you rock up to this particular place and there's an English bard who's playing for these merry Vikings who, you know, there are the Danes who are drinking a bunch of stuff and the English guy's happily just playing them drinking tunes. And he's like, hey, come along here. And you're like, oh, it's kind of wild that you're all like just hanging out here. And the English guy's like, yeah, it's a fucking great time. What do you mean? Why wouldn't I join the crew? And you can have drinking contests in the game where it's like skull, skull from your horn. And initially it seems like you're just having a regular drinking game engagement. But as soon as you take the first sip, you get poisoned, and it turns out this guy has just organized this whole thing to poison everybody and take down a bunch of Vikings, and says after the fact, like, basically, you, because they like murdered his wife previously and they just assumed he'd like gotten over it and they're all buddies now. And that's sort of a fascinating a little tidbit in that it's a twist, and also it is a microcosm of the larger conflict that underpins so much of what the story of Valhalla is. Now, because it's a story that spans so much time and there is so much to do, and if you're a completionist, boy, you're going to be at this one for a while. There are people who've been playing this game for like 1,000 hours. I played it for about 200 hours. And then I'd gotten to the point where I was finishing some expansions, but I hadn't actually finished the core main content. So, I took my ADHD medication and I was like, let's do this. And even though I have picked it up and put it down at various points and would inevitably lose the plot on some of the story elements, each of the pledging regions has a discrete overarching narrative. And then whenever you do lose the plot of what's exactly happening with Eivor's tale, and then far more complicated side, what's happening with Abstergo, it's not really about that conflict so much. It's about Eivor's participation in it. It's about who she is, or who he is if you played the male version. It's about Eivor's strange connection with Harvey, who is Odin. It's about her relationship with her family. It's these themes that are so strongly tied in with this Viking mindset of it is tribe first, it is family first. Everything else is supplementary. Other people's lives are supplementary. Other people's livelihoods are supplementary. Many times you can make some of your own decisions in the game, which gives you satisfying a bunch of agency, particularly towards the end where your brother Sigurd will be able to sort of glom back towards the middle path, or will go straight off the deep end, depending on how you treated him, if you respected him, and what calls you made at various points in the story. But there's something so satisfying about seeing Eivor evolve. She's such a dense and interesting character. And this is something that, despite Assassin's Creed evolving and changing so massively as a franchise in terms of genre, particularly, of course, setting and everything else, Ubisoft absolutely nail it in the protagonists. Eivor is fantastic. Cass is fantastic. I didn't play as much of Origins, but Bayek is really fascinating in the first 10 or 15 hours too. And then going straight back to Ezio Altair, Edward Kenway. They really know how to write a protagonist. So even when you lose the plot, or you're talking about the installments that deal very heavily in the present day, and if you're not too into the Abstergo parts, that might be a touch challenging, particularly after they moved away from Desmond, who was more of a fan favorite. I like Layla, but they seem to have truly understood that the bread and butter and what people really care about is the assassins and their discrete lives in their stories. It's gotten to a point where in the new games, I can't remember if it's Odyssey or Valhalla, but the game doesn't even kick off in the present day. It just starts in, I think it's Odyssey. It just starts in the past. And the few times, particularly in Valhalla, that you do come back to the present day, they're few and far between. And it's a huge narrative that if you want to get involved in what's happening with Abstergo and these archetypes of the Isu and everything that's going on, the gods and the apple of Eden and these items, and there's a lot. You'll either be so invested and you'll be like, yes, let's go. But if you feel like it's impenetrable because you can't grasp that or don't want to, it doesn't matter. And I think maybe people don't know that about the Ubisoft RPGs, the Ubisoft Assassin's Creed RPGs. And I think it's a bit of a shame. There's one more thing that I think, this is a tricky one. This is a tricky one to approach because I think there are valid reasons for having issues with video game companies. There's a bunch of different reasons that you would want to vote with your wallet and not support certain companies. And I am all for that. That is totally fine. But there's another element that I think is probably not too dissimilar to what happens with Activision and Call of Duty or EA and Battlefield. It's these franchises that have a wonderful name and are really killing the game at what they're doing, but it's kind of cool to dislike them. I think it's kind of like when Unity happened, I feel like it got really cool to hate on Assassin's Creed and just be like, it's lost its way, it's now. I think in a way it's kind of cool to hate on Call of Duty. There are lots of people who say Fortnite's good. I think it's like people kind of find it cool to hate on that. I'm not a Fortnite fan, but I just think it's such a shame if you're a fan of RPGs and you really want something that has that density of going through the hero's journey. These Assassin's Creed RPGs absolutely nail it, and in a really interesting way with morally grey characters. You are the hero, but like again, like I said, with you're Eivor the Viking or Cass or Alexios, you're Misthios, you're a mercenary. You're in it for the cash. And then whilst there are more traditional side quests in Odyssey, it's things like you go take a guy called Testicles to the Olympics. I think that's one side quest. Or you just deal with these like batch ancient Greeks. Or you're Cass and you just like, or Alexios, and you just bone everybody because it's like the Greekest thing. I don't want to offend any modern day Greeks, but it was certainly what ancient Greeks were doing. And I think there's like a lot of humor there. There's good flavor, but it's also just so appealing as playing this like really meaty, interesting protagonist in this playground of a world. Yeah, they're enormous, but I think it's fun to like, you can pick golden paths or you can just do what I do and go to every single little shiny thing. And yeah, like you can kind of get exhausted, but then, it's the sort of RPG that you can put it down and pick it up. And even if you lose track of where the story is going, you get to see how Eivor continues to react to the world. Just give it a shot. Just give it a shot. Just watch me play like an hour because I really think you'd like it. And you get to a point where it's you do that rags to God type progression that I absolutely love in an RPG. And it's cool because as these games have continued to have quite a lot of support, both of them, that I'm mainly talking about Odyssey and Valhalla, it's like, okay, you're a god now. All right, here's a fucking god. Here is like some incredible beast of mythology or like a face-off like from your nightmares. Go deal with that. Like here's a new area, like the Elysium. I think it was the Elysium areas that were added as part of the DLC for Odyssey, where you're dealing with encounters with really tough enemies that you need to approach in a completely different way than how you've been dealing with anything so far. So even though you were super tough, it's like, okay, you gotta reassess, you gotta sit back. You're rewarded for parrying, for being slow to engage, for dodging. And this isn't just in the end game content. This is, if you're playing at a normal or slightly challenging difficulty, something you have to think about all game long. And when you do eventually get to that point where you're a god and you get a couple of choices, do you want to, put up the difficulty so you keep getting that challenge, or just enjoy the fruits of your labor, which is personally what I like doing. I earned these levels. I was a completionist. I did all the little shiny dots. So I'm going to be a fucking boss now. I would implore you to check it out, or if you're just curious or hesitant, maybe take a look at some gameplay and see if it's for you, or just take a look at how dense the RPG mechanics are, because I reckon it's been underrated or it's gone understated, and it's something I think people are either just like playing and they're not really talking about, or it's just like not even gonna bother. So since I am just here saying things at you, I just wanted to tell you I think you might really like it. And since it doesn't seem like we're getting Elder Scrolls 6 anytime, and you just want something else to play that is in that AAA field, that it doesn't quite do the so action oriented thing that Diablo's doing in the RPG sphere, but it's a bigger budget and bigger world than what some of the AA guys can do or are doing, then this is a really cool place to look. I think these games are really bloody good. And if it sounds like something that you've been yearning for and you just assumed, why would you want to turn to Assassin's Creed for a hardcore WRPG in 2024? Well, honestly, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find too many better places to look right now. But that's just my 2 cents. 1 cent of this 33-year-old woman yelling at Cloud. It's not Cloud. I feel like Cloud comes from Final Fantasy now, but I meant the Simpsons meme. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me. Thanks so much for all your thoughts on the last video and the one before it as well. I really appreciate, I read all your comments, like hearing what you think is so cool. And I like having these conversations with you, whether you agree with me or not, totally fine. Yeah, it's just fun to share and deep dive into this medium that I think is so fascinating and has so much to say. And I love that there are still brand new ways it's finding to say it and conversations we can have about it. So let's do that again sometime soon. Thanks.